Hi everyone. So I'm going to shout as loud as I can. As Tom said, if you can't hear me, just stick your hand up or something, and I'll see if I can repeat myself or talk a bit louder. I've got the middle non-technical slot. Wanted to talk about some ways to talk about data to people who aren't in data, people who are non-technical, don't get data, don't kind of care anything about that stuff. So first of all, feel free to ask questions at any point, stick your hand up, wave, whatever. Use the app if you can get it to work, Tom mentioned at the start, or there's space for questions at the end, whatever you fancy really, just knock yourselves out, not literally. So a little bit about me. I've been in the legal industry in data for 20 years. Over that time I've worked in a wide variety of roles and have responsibility over a whole bunch of stuff, ranging from kind of engineering, data warehousing, integrations, analytics, dashboarding, client reporting, the whole kind of realm of stuff there that kind of I've been looking at over the years. This was one of the things I wanted to talk about, how to kind of talk about data, because really I really enjoy talking about data with people. My wife tells me frequently not to do it at dinner parties. It's not very interesting apparently, but hopefully I've got a slightly more kind of captive audience here that you might kind of enjoy a little bit of it. One of the things I enjoy most about the role is kind of developing people, whether that's technical data people to help bring them along and teach them new skills, help them develop new skills themselves, and actually also talking to non-data people about data, trying to kind of suggest they could do a few things for themselves, trying to show them it's not quite as scary as some people will think, and you don't actually have to worry about it. You can do some things. You're not going to break anything by clicking that button on the spreadsheet or by trying to change a slicer in a dashboard. You won't break anything. Just have a go, have a play, see what you come up with. So enough about me. So the background, really, business people don't often get data. And they shouldn't really have to understand all of the kind of little technical details that we as data people go through on a day-to-day basis. It's not really their bag. They are business people. They have a specialism. They're very good at what they do, but they don't have to understand what we do in its full context. And they should, like I said, they shouldn't really have to. Mainly, they want an answer to something. The whole purpose of kind of a conversation between a data person and a non-data person is normally they want something, or you want to give them something. And really our challenge is to kind of get into a position where we can present that outcome, whatever it is they want, to them in a consumable way for them. There's a whole range of things around how we can kind of present data to people. Dan touched on some of these earlier. You can just kind of put stuff in a place and tell people to go and find it, or you can give them a nice dashboard, or you can, schedule things to send them stuff at specific times. Really, a lot of that is about what works best for the consumer, and allied with what's possible, what's technically possible, what you can afford to do. But as far as possible, our challenge is to kind of present that stuff to the consumers in the best way for them. So, really, I want to talk about kind of talking to people about data in a kind of three separate stages. So the first stage is the understanding. You need to understand what it is you're trying to do. What do you want from the conversation? So there are two main reasons for a conversation to take place in my mind. First one, you want something from the consumers. It might be an approval, you might want to sign off on something, or you might want some budget to go and do something. You might want some understanding around, you've discovered a particular insight and you're trying to present this and show the business, this is important, come and look at this, you need to focus on this. Or you might be seeking feedback on something, a POC or a prototype that you're creating, and you want some feedback from the business saying, well, is this doing what you want it to do? Is this hitting the right spot for you? The second main reason, they want something from you. They might want a new thing. That could be an app, it could be a report, it could be a product, it could be a piece of analysis, it could be a simple number. They might want to change to something that already exists. So a new feature, amendments, something new around an existing product. Or they might want an update around something that something you're already working on, a project update or something along those lines. So yeah, the two kind of main reasons for the conversations to kind of take place. The key thing to remember in all of this is focus on what you want to achieve from that conversation. So you've got an aim, you want to present this, you want to show this, you want to answer that question. Remember to try and focus on that at all times. The second point around understanding, try and understand your audience. Now this very much depends on who the audience is. Generally, it could be either could be a big group of people, could be a small group of people, but in that room, in that group of people, you have key stakeholders and decision makers. If you're working in an organisation where you kind of know your audience, this is considerably easier. But effectively, you're trying to identify who the key stakeholders and decision makers who will be present in that conversation are. It might be one person, but yeah, the other thing to kind of consider around that is not always the most senior person in the room who's going to be the one you want to connect with and want to kind of get your point across to, who's the key decision maker. For those key stakeholders and decision makers, you need to understand a few things as fully as you can. Understand what their motivation is, what it is they want from this, what their interest in the subject is. You've got supremely non-technical people who really don't care. It's a different set of kind of approaches to someone who's really interested in what you're trying to say. What their level of technical understanding is, so kind of how deep you can go into the technical. What's their kind of prior knowledge of what you're talking about? Where have they been involved in something before? Is this a project that they already know all about? How much time they're likely to have allocated to this? So that's really important if you're talking to someone very senior. They might only have 15 minutes for you to get your whole point across and get an answer from them. And also, have there been previous interactions with these key people? So what's their predisposition? What do they think of you? What do they think of your service? You're going to get a different response than someone who you've produced great work for, as to someone who maybe you've kind of taken a long time on a project or a delivery for. Most people in work have a fairly selfish attitude. That's not a criticism. People are in a particular role to perform a particular task. They're only going to care about the things that affect them. They're quite selfish in that regard. So the attitude of a lot of people is kind of what's in it for me. Bear that in mind when you're kind of looking at who's involved in the audience, who it is, who you're kind of talking to. And lastly, are there any other barriers in the audience to you achieving what you want? Again, focusing on what it is you want to achieve. Is there anything that's going to stop me achieving that? The last point around understanding, fear of change. This is something that's prevalent everywhere. There are a lot of people in a lot of organisations who don't like change. Broadly, there are a number of kind of types of fear of change. There's a general kind of fear, kind of conservative attitude. I don't like it to change, I like this way. I'm happy with my role, I like clicking this button 20 times a day, and that gets me what I want. There's a kind of specific fear of change. What it is you're talking about is going to take my job. If you're presenting a new set of fancy dashboards to an accounts department, half of which day job is crunching numbers to produce exactly that, they're going to have a very specific fear that what you're talking about there, that's going to take away my job, it's what I do. There's a general fear of tech, all the noise in the media at the moment around generative AI, ChatGPT, all the rest of it. Business people have heard this stuff, they have no idea what it means. Basically most people connected to Terminator, Skynet's coming, we're all going to die. But there's that kind of general fear of tech that is kind of broadly, generally associated with the data world. So there's that kind of slightly more specific general fear of technology as it was. And the last thing to consider is, does your organisation already have a change management function of some kind? Is there already processes and procedures embedded that you can leverage, that you can work alongside and get some tips from, maybe bring in some change management professionals to kind of help you kind of smooth over the fear of change and kind of getting that stuff changed. So, in terms of understanding, that's broadly three main points. The next kind of area I want to talk around is preparation, preparation for a conversation. Now, the kind of conversation piece can range from a 5-minute chat to a 45-minute complex presentation. How much of this you want to apply to any given situation depends on what you're trying to achieve and how big this is. But these are the kind of general things I think to consider, to prepare for before you go and have a conversation with someone. So, how best to communicate the thing you're talking about? What's the best way to talk about this particular subject? Part of that feeds back to knowing your audience. So, if you know them well, if you've presented them before, how did they react best to what you've said to them before? So, what's their kind of preferred way of absorbing information from you? The next point is, what's the best way to sort of communicate what it is you're talking about? Is it spoken? Is it a presentation? Can you do something interactive? Dan just gave a really good example of something incorporating all three of those. There's a lot of interaction, there's some spoken bits, there's a presentation. And really, in terms of a theme, it's useful to have elements of all of those. The interactive bit works in certain situations, it kind of depends what it is you're doing. But bringing that element of interactivity in is always good if you can. And really, kind of a blend of all of those is often the best way if the kind of space and the situation allows. When you're communicating it, tell a cohesive story. Try and tell a story. And it doesn't necessarily have to work from from the start to the finish, but it's got to all be joined up. Try not to jump around and kind of, and I need to tell you this and mention this, and anything you're going to rely on to talk about later on, kind of bring in earlier. So you're running through in a kind of linear fashion, in a kind of cohesive story. There's a lot of material out there about data storytelling and that kind of thing that this sort of references. Lastly, try and give the audience what it is they want. So quite a lot of the sort of pre-thought and the understanding of the audience, if you can understand what they want, try and give them that. People are much more likely to listen if you're giving them what they want. So, just want to talk for a minute about words versus pictures. So I sort of touched on this a little bit, but you can kind of incorporate spoken and written in one kind of set of presentations, as it were. A lot of people retain pictures better than words. Some people respond better to words than pictures. Ideally, some kind of visual aid to back up what you're saying is kind of useful. So if you've got a visual aid, some kind of hints and tips. Try not to make it too busy. Try not to get too much stuff on the screen. Avoid charts for the sake of it. For everything on screen, ask yourself, is this actually new? Is this advancing the story? Is it adding something and telling the audience something? Basically, try and avoid death by PowerPoint. Doesn't interest anyone. Tell a story with your visuals. As I said, don't jump around in your story. Work from kind of in a linear fashion, start to end. And remember to consider the possibility of people with visual impairments. So the solicitors I work for, Clyde & Co., someone spent an awful lot of time creating a branding document. Someone in the marketing team, it's like 120 pages or something PDF. An awful lot of kind of really quite useful stuff in there that's giving a really clear branding message for the firm. And there's a section in the middle of that, about 10 pages, that talk about how to brand charts and graphs. And they have two core corporate colours. There's a teal blue kind of colour. In fact, it's quite like the blue on the name tags you've got, and a kind of purplish colour. When you kind of describe them, they don't sound like they go together, but they actually work quite well. But a lot of the branding stuff around charts and graphs, the very clear guidelines are, you use one of these colours, and then you use variations of that colour with different transparencies to kind of set out the different elements of the chart. And that's your colour scheme, you're kind of limited to that. Now, the limitation of that is it doesn't make it easy on a dashboard to kind of highlight things. However, it's really clear for kind of colour blindness that there are going to be different shades, different tones there. So it can't be a problem from that perspective. So there's always pros and cons to this kind of thing. But the key kind of point is consider visual impairments with any kind of visual aid you're creating. Lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about language. So avoid jargon, avoid three-letter acronyms. They all have their place, they're quite useful when you're talking to other data professionals, so everyone knows what you're talking about. But if you start abbreviating stuff to a three-letter acronym, even if you introduce that at the start of the discussion, by the time you get to talking about it again, you already probably forgotten what it means. So try and be specific about what it is you mean and avoid jargon as much as possible. Try and use business language. One of my managers a few years ago introduced a kind of concept of a kind of high school graduate approach. If what you're saying would make sense to a high school graduate, then you're probably getting it in about the right kind of context for a general business user, because they aren't going to get anything more technical than that. You're just, you're trying to kind of not dumb it down, but bring it to a level that all of your audience is going to understand what you're talking about. Limit the detail, depending on the audience here a little bit, but especially if it's someone of a high level. You want to go straight from the problem with a very limited amount of detail about how you're solving this to the solution. Think about it as an elevator pitch. You've got a couple of minutes really to kind of get people's attention and get them kind of interested in what it is you're talking about. This one's really quite important. All of the data professionals kind of have a tendency to say, look, I've done this great bit of work, and try and explain how you've done it. We should only ever try and include the kind of top level descriptions of stuff of complex processes when we're trying to kind of present to non-data people, because they aren't going to get it. If you want to if you get questions about exactly the process you followed, then you can follow up and go into more detail. But as a general rule, try not to kind of go too deep into the complexities of what we've done. Last bit about language is humour. This very much depends on the audience, but if you can bring in a little bit of humour, then just keeps people interested to a certain extent. I suspect that the chief exec probably would appreciate you trucking one-liners all the way through. So it's very much kind of targeted who the audience is. So we've done a bit of understanding, we've done a bit of pre-set up and preparation. We'll talk about the conversation itself. And the conversation, as I said, can take many forms. It can be a quick conversation, it can be a presentation. There can be multiple ways this works. But having the conversation, always speak slowly and loudly if you have to. Try and set the scene, but keep it kind of brief. And that very much again depends on your understanding of the audience. If the audience is already heavily involved in the project, all you really say is, well, as you know, we're doing this. If it's something new you're presenting, you need a bit more background. As I said before, keep it brief, keep it short. You'll probably get from the preparation some sort of a script. That doesn't have to be written down exactly what you're going to say, but some sort of rough outline of how you're going to approach the conversation. Try and stick to that script, but don't read from it. Don't stand there with a piece of paper and read stuff out if you can possibly help it. Again, that kind of doesn't keep people's interest very much. Be clear about when the audience can ask questions. This varies from person to person. Some people prefer to rattle through everything and ask questions at the end. Some are happy to be kind of interrupted as they go along. But either way, just be clear about it at the start. You can ask questions whenever you want. Stick your hand up. And at the end of the conversation, summarise the key takeaway points, the key things you want to get from that conversation, your key takeaways for the audience. Again, remember to focus on what you want to achieve. Lastly, really, feedback. So, as a part of the conversation, or after the conversation, what sort of feedback do you want? So that can be an answer to something. As I said, you might be looking for sign-off or approval. That could be an immediate yes, or it can be a kind of formal email or whatever it is you need after the conversation, but a kind of immediate answer to a question, can I do this? It could be instant feedback, tell me what you think of this, to the people on the call. That tends to work better with a small group. Otherwise it gets kind of a bit messy in how you kind of absorb feedback from everyone. Could be ongoing feedback. So this tends to be more if what you're talking about is a product, and embedded within that product there is kind of feedback mechanism. So it's kind of how does that work to kind of gain frequent feedback as people are using things. Or there could be a follow-up. So this works quite well if it's a big group of people. A kind of survey monkey or something afterwards saying, what did you think? What can I do differently? Is it a yes or a no for you, kind of thing. So in terms of feedback, there's several ways you can kind of absorb that. So really, in summary, just to recap. Before the conversation, you need to understand a few things. You need to understand what you want from the conversation. You need to understand your audience, and you need to understand a little about fear of change and how that might impact on how people absorb what you're saying. You need to do a bit of preparation. What's the best way to communicate what you're trying to say? Should you use words, should you use pictures, should it be a combination? And what kind of language it is you should be using. And lastly, during the conversation, you've got you have the actual conversation yourself, and then you ask for the feedback. So, for me, that's it really. Any questions about any of that?
Mark, I've got a quick question, sorry. Thanks for your talk, but it's a particular question. So, for example, fear of change.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to have that conversation? So say for example, you create this automation tool where, like you said, someone is manually doing that data work, and you found a solution. And I think traditionally we always go and say it's value adding, you've got more time, you're freeing up time to do more value add stuff.
Yeah.
But how else would you pitch that and understand that fear of change and bring that into that conversation?
Okay, so fear of change. It's a whole kind of science on its own, actually, change management. But part of, to some way, but you've already suggested one of the answers, which is that kind of explaining how this kind of adds value to their role. Try and get them involved as much as possible. If you can identify the people, try and get them involved in the setup, in the process, so they feel they have a buy-in to actually what it is you're creating, as much as you can. And also, it's worth kind of spending a bit of time from the understanding perspective, trying to understand, even with a conversation with individuals, what it is that they're actually worried about. Is it that kind of, this is going to take my job, and how you can mitigate that. What else could they be doing with their time? If I'm creating something that automates 20% of your job, that's great. You've got more time to do the interesting bit that isn't the kind of number crunching, butt pushing part of your job. It's that kind of trying to put it in a perspective that person who's afraid will understand. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, fantastic.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Yeah. Anyone else?
So do you think there's ever a place where you just say to an exec or non-technical person, you just gotta trust me on this? Say the exec's not getting it, and you're just gonna be look, I'm telling you the answer, maybe you don't get it, you think differently, but I'm right. Is there ever if you get in that position, how would you broach it or try and get around it?
It's kind of a difficult question to answer. It sort of comes into that understanding piece of trying to understand that individual and their motivations. If it's and also what kind of relationship do you have with them? If you're in a position of trust, then you can probably get away with saying, you've just got to trust me on this. I'm only asking for a small amount of money to go away and do this. I can prove it to you. If it's someone who you don't have that kind of relationship with, then it's sometimes a bit more difficult to do that. So you've kind of almost got to. You might maybe need to spend a little more time taking them through a bit of a journey and a bit of a story around, still in layman's terms, but what it is you can do. Almost in the way you were talking about pain points earlier. Identify the pain points that are current in the existing processes and effectively state, I can remove this pain point. I think that might be one way to do it. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I would say, like, just to add to that, would you say, like, I don't know if you just said it there now, but would you say, like, bringing the customer on the journey of change with you, alongside, like, data scientists, data analysts, to actually help with the fear of change?
Absolutely, yeah. As much as you can, bring people along on the change journey. I mean, this is very much focused on kind of talking to people as a sort of point solution rather than the whole change process. But yeah, as much as you possibly can, bring the business along. You know, if people are interested enough to kind of, you know, have regular updates with you, see how you're producing stuff, see what's happening. Then bring them along. That's brilliant.
Yeah, and I also feel like with AI, people feel like, oh, we're going to take your jobs, we're going to automate everything, but sell it to them rather than going to take your jobs, but augment their jobs rather than take their jobs. I think that's a better sell point and a better communication point.
Absolutely, and you know, none of us ever got into this to take people's jobs away.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is ease pain points,
Exactly,
to, you know, reduce manual processing, to remove problems. You know, and that's kind of a benefit for everyone, even if they don't necessarily realise it immediately.
100%,
You mentioned having a script and telling the audience when they can ask questions.
Yep.
Why would you recommend that over having that as an engagement throughout the discussion?
Sorry, I didn't mean tell them they can ask questions at the end. It's more of a what works for you as the person chairing the discussion. If you're happy to take questions all the way through, great. Just state that at the start. All I mean is kind of be clear about when to ask questions. So the audience can ask questions at the appropriate time. It isn't going to kind of interrupt you getting your message across. Yeah. Okay. If anyone wants to talk to me later or kind of look me up on LinkedIn or anything else, I've got another lovely QR code that might not work. But yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.